Several people online were asking how to go about creating grass with the FiberFX tools in LightWave. Now there's all different types of grass and different looks and things like that, but they were asking specifically how to create thick grass, so that not what you would see from a distance, but what you would see up close. And so what I thought we could do is, like I said, there's a lot of different types of grass we could create, but I'm going to create the type of grass that my home association here in my neighborhood would like me to have, that I haven't had much luck with out in the front yard. But I figured I could do it in LightWave, and that would make me happy. So what I have here is just a flat plane. And I need to go ahead and throw some fibers on here. So I'm just going to hit Control F8 to bring up my processing tab and add pixel filter. Let's do fiber filter, and I'm going to double click to open it up. I don't need this panel anymore, and since I'm working with a small real estate here, I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. So now all I need to do is select the object in the scene that I want to apply FiberFX to, and of course all I have is that flat plane, so that makes it easy. So I'll just activate. And if we'd like, we can turn on the OpenGL draw feature, and we can see it back here. Now again, with more real estate, I would just slide this panel out of the way, but we can see enough of it here that I can get an idea of what I want to do. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start running down and setting up some of the attributes. One of the nice things is that there's only a few attributes, and once you understand what each attribute does, you can get the type of look that you're after fairly quickly. So the first thing that I'm seeing is that I don't want them to be going as crazy as they are. So for stray, I'm just going to set that to 0. Okay, and for let's take kink and let's set that to 0, because I don't want the frizzy looking hair. For gravity, I'm going to set that to 0 for right now. As you can see, the fibers are going to stand straight up. Before, they started drooping, and now I'm going to want that, but I'm going to want to create that a little more random than what was going on there. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at what's going to make us give us those blades, because right now these are just individual fibers. And so what I'm going to do is, for clump, I'm going to crank that all the way up to 100% so that it will go and pinch those together at the end. So what clump does is, towards the end of the fibers, the fiber patches, it will pull them together. Now it'll only pull together each patch, so it's good to know that you're not going to be able to pull individual patches together. You can only pull each patch, the hair in each patch together. Okay, so I'm going to keep scale at 600, which normally is too long for most of the stuff that I've been working on, but for this we'll have a tall patch of grass. For random length, I'm going to crank that up to 100 so that we can see that we're now getting some randomization in there. But just like the surface editor, I rarely like to set these settings without using some kind of texture to drive it, just so that I have even more control over, and instead of just saying 100% random, I'm going to open up the texture editor. And a good one to use that I've been using a lot is your default turbulence. And let's go ahead and keep these settings the same except for scale. I want to shrink it down so that my pattern is much smaller. So let's just let's go small. So I'm going to try 20 millimeters, and we'll keep these settings. In other examples, we'll take a look at how we can crank up the value and contrast and things like that. Okay, so now I've got some random length that's going to be driven by this procedural, and what I want to do is, let's go ahead and get a quick render just to see where we're at. So F9. And in 1.9 seconds, we can kind of start to see where we're at. I'm seeing that we're getting the strands. I'm not really liking the density. I think that we need a lot more. It's looking too wispy. And there's another thing that we can do to fix that. But I'm going to go ahead and crank up. Let's do fiber density. I'm just going to crank it up to 150. I want just a boatload of fibers in there. And in 5.1 seconds, we have a lot more fibers, and we're starting to see a little bit more of what we're after. Now, one thing that I'm noticing is that the ends are becoming transparent. They're transparent at the tip. So I want to fix that, because for grass, I don't want that. It's a great feature for hair. So I'm going to go over to the shading tab, and under tip transparency, I'm going to say 0. I don't want any part of that tip to be transparent. Okay, so I'll go ahead and continue. That's 4.9 seconds for this. A little less time because it doesn't have to worry about the transparency. So I like where this is going, except I don't think grass usually grows straight up like that. So that's where we're going to go back to gravity, but instead of just using the same gravity all over by just keying in a number here, like I said, most of the time I like to drive it with something other than just a scalar value. So I'm going to use procedural. Let's use turbulence again, and for this, let's try 200 millimeters. And so basically, I'm just shrinking down this texture here, and let's take a look at what this looks like. Okay, so we're getting really close to what we want. Now, again, I'm thinking about my home association in the neighborhood, and my grass kind of looks like this in areas, and they're not very happy. So we should probably change the color. So what I'm going to do is go over to the color tab. Now I could adjust the base color, tip color, base color too, and I can blend those together. But what I'd rather do is, you guessed it, use a procedural texture. So I'm going to just click on the texture editor, and let's use turbulence. It worked for us for the other stuff. So what I'll do is, let's just pick a green. Now what I could do is also change this base color out here to another green, and that would give us a look something like this, which is one of the first tests that I posted online showing this example. But what I think would be better and make it a little more realistic and to make it look more like the grass out in my yard is we're going to keep this blondish brown color so we can get some variation in there. For these settings, I'll keep those the same, but let's go ahead and change the scale again. And I'm just typing in random values. I mean, I used 0.2 before. I'm just using 0.3, trying to mix it up a little bit. So let me close this, and let's take a look. Okay, so we're really close. We've got 5.8 seconds, and we're getting a pretty nice little patch of grass. One of the things that we're going to want to do is add shadows. We've been rendering without shadows, so of course that is going to increase render time. But one thing that we can do to speed up render time when it comes to shadows is come over to the Shadow tab. Now there's various settings that we can go over in future videos, but for right now what I want to do is, instead of having it be a dense shadow that that could look for the look that I might want to go for, but instead I'm just going to lower this. The shadow's not going to be as intense, so I'm just going lower than 40 in each of those, self shadow and cast shadow, and just trying 20. So let's take a look. Of course, in order to see it with shadows, what I'm going to want to do is come over to the Render tab, Render Globals, and under the Render tab, I'm going to choose Ray Trace Shadows. Just turn that on, and let's take a look. Okay, so with shadows, we've got 47 seconds, and here we go. We've got our thick blades of grass, and we've got the color variation in the shadows. Now there's one thing that I would like to throw in there just to kind of mix it up a little bit, and let's take a look at that, and we'll call this one finished. So what I want to do is come back over to the Geometry tab, and one thing that I'm noticing is that I've got a little bit of randomness going on with the random length, but one thing that I could also do is come over here to Tuft. Now what Tuft does is it takes the higher the value, the shorter the fibers will be around the center of each cluster. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to crank that up to 100%. Now I could randomize it with the texture, but for right now we'll just say 100%. And so what's going to happen is that in the center you're going to get tall fibers, and then out from the center of each cluster you'll get shorter fibers, which can give a really nice effect. So let's see what that's going to look like on this example. Okay, so as you can see, we've now got various random lengths going on because we have the random length, but the tuft also, let me go ahead and kill that. The tuft setting also shortened it up around the the base of each cluster coming out from the center. So I think it looks a little more realistic and gives a really nice effect. So that's just a quick example of going about creating thick grass that would be up close to the screen. so that you can get the detail that you would like using FiberFX. I'd like to leave this little example with just a couple quick tips on a way that you can work fast when setting up your FiberFX. And I did them in this example, but I'd like to just point them out. I use the OpenGL draw function here from the get-go so that I could get the length that I wanted and kind of the shape and get the basic idea of what was going to happen without having to ever render, which is a really nice feature of that. Now, it's not going to give you all the information that you would need to know exactly what it's going to look like in final render, but it gives you quite a bit of information there. Then the second thing that I did that I think is very useful is I did a lot of render tests without ray trace shadows, without having any shadows, because again, I'm just trying to get the overall look. Now, the look is going to change with shadows, of course, but so is the render times. And as you can see, the render times weren't that bad for 150,000 fibers. We can see right here. I don't believe the render times were too shabby. I was pretty happy with the render times, but as you could see, it jumped up when I added shadows. Still not bad, but I was able to move much faster and change my settings. Normally, I would get even the tuft in there and things like that before I'd ever turn on shadows, just so that I get the basic look that I'm after. Once you have that, turn on shadows, do little minor tweaks, and you're good to go. So that should speed up the process of creating the look you're after without having to wait for renders, even if they are under a minute. Sometimes even waiting for a 20-second render is like watching paint dry when you're the one watching the render wait. So there you go, a couple quick tips and a look at creating thick grass with FiberFX.